Good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday night, so I look eminently shocked because it's that time of the week again. Sorry, you caught me in the middle of my new read. So, yeah, how rude of you to interrupt. Anyway, hope you're all well. Welcome to our 6th virtual Noir at the Bar. Tonight, for your delight and delectation, we have A.M. Peacock, Michael Nath, C.J. Cooke, B. Davenport, Craig Robertson, C.L. Taylor, Tony Kent, Alison Bruce, S.J.I. Holliday, and Quentin Bates. Lots of initials in there this week. I don't know why. Anyway, if you don't already know, I'm Vic Watson. I host Newcastle and Harrogate, and now I'm in your living room, bathroom, kitchen, I don't know. Have to say, without Peter Rozovsky starting this 12 years ago in Philadelphia, it wouldn't be happening at all. But now we have Noir at the Bars all over the world and all over the computer. So there's still books to win. Email this email address with the subject heading enter if you'd like to be entered into our free prize draw. The readers will be put at random from the hat, but I think the queue at the bar should be shorter unless you're in Derek Farrell's house, and I think the bar queue might be quite long there. If you'd like to talk about us on social media, please use the hashtag VNATB. If you would like to donate in order to help us keep the lights on, i.e. pay for this facility, please visit Ko-Fi, but you're under no obligation. Noir at the Bar is not for profit and there's no pressure for you to pay here. It's all free. Right, from this week onwards, I'm going to be sharing with you my favourite Noir at the Bar memory. I have lots of them, and I would like you to do the same in the chat if you don't mind. So I'm going to pick this week my return after maternity leave in February, when I drove into Newcastle thinking, why am I doing this? Nobody's going to come. We've lost them, we've lost the audience. And lo and behold, people were on the ceiling. It was so full. So there is definitely still a thirst for noir in Newcastle and in the world. I see we have people joining us from New Zealand tonight. So thank you very much and good morning. Usually we have audience participation in the live event, so please do feel free to give me a drum roll as I pull the names out of our very brand new hat, because the old ratty tatty is no longer with us. It disintegrated last week all over my conservatory floor. And also, if you hear anything you're particularly impressed with, please do give us a woo. We do have the text chat, so as always, Nikki Black is bouncing. If she sees anything inappropriate, you're out. And we do have the Q&A facility as well. So if you have any questions for our readers tonight, I will endeavour to get them answered for you. But let's not wait any longer to get started. Pour yourselves a drink and settle in for an evening of noir. So, as I say, new hat, overpriced, panic buying House of Fraser a few years ago. Oh, I'll probably never wear it, it's far too big. Anyway, drum roll please. B. Davenport is first out of the hat this evening. B. Davenport is the writing name of former newspaper and BBC journalist Barbara Henderson. B's debut novel, In Too Deep, was shortlisted for the Luke Bitmead Award, woo, and published by Legend Press, which also published her second novel, This Little Piggy. Her latest novel, The Misper, is for a teen YA readership and is published by the Conrad Press. She's also had 2 children's novels published. B has a PhD in creative writing, and she's the programme leader for creative writing at the Open College of the Arts, as well as teaching journalism at Newcastle University. B lives in Berwick-upon-Tweed, and I believe that's where she's joining us from tonight. So everybody, big round of applause for B. Davenport.
Thanks very much, everybody. I hope you can hear me all right. I'm going to read from The Misper, which was published in 2018. Even though it's not technically crime, it was written for a teen YA audience, but it does have a crime at its heart, and it is quite dark. So I hope you will enjoy it. The narrator is Anna, and she's 14 years old. And this section is from very close to the beginning of the book. November the 3rd. It was just after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was pretty dark. There were smells of gunpowder in the air because the kids had been setting off fireworks every day since the shops started selling them. Any day at school was bad enough without Zoe, and usually any day without Kerry was a good one, but everything had been off its head today, like a weird dream where everything you think you know is not quite right. The best parts of the day were when no one was talking to me at all. The worst parts were when people asked me questions. 3:30 couldn't come quickly enough, and I part run, part walked home so fast I was out of breath. And there was a police car outside my house. I stopped dead and took some big mouthfuls of air. It tasted of fumes, fireworks, and frost. My first thought was to turn and walk away again in the opposite direction. I almost did it. But then I pictured the inside of the house. Mum putting out the best teacups and searching the cupboard for some good biscuits for the police officers. She'd have that worry frown on her forehead, so deep it hurts me to look at it. And every minute waiting for me would make it worse. So I reached for my front door key. It slipped in my hand. They were the same officers who came round yesterday and someone else. The light-haired woman detective and the fat bloke who was her sidekick. They were just what you see in the films. Good cop, bad cop. I knew how they worked. She tried to get me to tell her what happened by pretending to be my friend. He tried to get me to tell him what happened by pretending he already knew and he could see right through me. They said, "Hello again, Anna." And I guessed there was no good news. The woman cop gave me that sympathetic smile, and the fat bloke already had my mum's cup in his fat fist and he was dunking a biscuit in his tea. And the circles around my mum's eyes looked so dark, you'd think she'd drawn them on. All these things made me feel guilty. Her smile, his sneer, mum's face. I said there was someone else there too this time, another woman, younger, spiky hair, the colour of apricots, and a row of earrings in each lobe. She looked like a scarecrow that had been pushed into a skirt suit from Oxfam. They introduced her as Jenny and they rattled on about psychology. It turned out my mum agreed this woman can talk to me. A nut doctor, great. "You've been running," said the lady cop. I raised my eyes and I stopped myself from saying, "Well done, Sherlock Holmes," only because Mum was in the room. The friendly one's called Sandra. Her hair was in the sleekest bob you ever saw, like she ironed it along with her blinding white shirts. I just shrugged. I didn't want to say anything more than I had to. "Well, get your breath back," she said. "I thought you and I might go for a little walk and have a chat." "I don't want to." My mum said, "Anna," in a hiss. I just stared down at the tablecloth, the best green tablecloth. I stared until its pattern blurred. "If I'd said that to a policeman when I was your age, I'd have got a crack around the head," said the fat one. And he smiled to make it sound like a joke. "We don't bite, pet. We just have to find out what happened to Kerry." I looked over to Sandra and she gave me a wink as if we were somehow in this together. She stood up. "Come on, we'll leave Rob to get fatter on your mum's nice biscuits. Let's go out for a bit of air." And this Jenny stood up too. My mum gave me one of those tiny little digs in the back. It was like, "Behave yourself, don't make things worse." It was darker, and the pinch of cold in the air made my eyes water. The three of us walked down past the row of houses, and I didn't have to be told which way to go. To the cut, the scene of the crime, or the scene of whatever it was that really happened. "I guess you're having a tough time," Sandra had a sigh in her voice. I shrugged back. "You guess right then. No wonder you're a copper." Silence. And then, "Anna, I'm not having a go at you. It must be terrible for you. Don't treat me like an enemy. I just have to find out what happened. It's my job." "Well, you're not doing it very well then, are you?" I expected her to get angry, but she just laughed. "You're right, I'm not, am I? But think about this. If you're having a tough time, how do you think it is for Kerry's mum and the rest of her family?" I kept my eyes down, and under my feet the paving stones seemed to slide along of their own accord. When I first moved to our street, I was scared of Kerry's mum. She was really strict, and I could see why Kerry didn't argue back. She had this black, shiny hair, cut short and boxy, like a man. She wasn't fat, not really, but sort of square. You wouldn't rugby tackle her because you'd lose. And I once heard my mum call her buxom, which I thought was a hilarious word. She didn't say it to her face, of course. That morning, though, when I was about to go to school, Kerry's mum wandered out of her house just wearing her dressing gown and slippers. Somehow, in the space of 2 nights, she turned into a different person. She didn't look square-shaped anymore. The skin kind of hung off her face. She started walking up and down and shouting for Kerry until her dad came out, took her arm and walked her back inside. I hid behind the fence until her door closed. We reached the cut. The cut, it's what it says it is. It's a little cinder path between Scrogsfield and the other side of our housing estate. It's the sort of place parents tell their kids not to go on their own. They do, though, for a day usually. There were stories about the cut. They said a man kicked a dog in the head and left it to die in there. The older kids used to tell the little ones you could sometimes still hear the ghost dog whining at night. Sometimes Zoe and I used it as a quick way home. Not today, though, obviously. It had police tape around it and an officer in uniform standing at the entrance. Sandra nodded at him and he stood back to let her past. She switched on a torch and beckoned me. It was the smell I noticed first, that mixture of earth and rotting leaves and dog wee. I shuddered. It stinks. Places like this always stink, Sandra said. She kept moving her torchlight around. Okay, Anna, so you all came in here on Halloween night. I'd already been dragged through this story so many times since Sunday that I'd lost count. I couldn't decide if Sandra didn't listen properly or if she was trying to catch me out. There was only one thing we knew for sure. This was the last place we saw Kerry. Hang on. I stopped walking. Is Zoe doing this too? Have you even spoken to Zoe? I couldn't see Sandra's face, but that Jenny woman was right beside me and she gave me a look as if I'd said something really mad. What? I said. A couple of seconds silence. What? I asked again. Sandra gave a little sigh. Zoe's not very well today, Anna. Sam. Jenny reached across and pulled her sleeve. I can't believe Anna doesn't know yet. We should tell her. My inside squirmed. Tell me what? Sandra turned to me and pressed her lips together for a moment. It was a long moment. Zoe is in hospital, Anna. We're not sure. They're doing all they can. I wrapped my arms around myself to stop myself shaking. It was so cold. My teeth started to rattle and I couldn't stop them. My eyes blurred and I couldn't see. It was so very dark. That's it. Thanks very much for listening, and I'm going to hand you back to Vic.
Thank you so much, B. Right. Okay. Don't forget, if you've got any questions for the writers taking part, you've got your, I hope I'm pressing the right button here, the Q&A bit there. So please do ask any if you think of any. Right. Okay. Okey-dokey. Who's next? Craig Robertson. So, the former journalist Craig Robertson is the author of 8 novels set on the mean streets of contemporary Glasgow and one set on the not so mean streets of Tórshavn, I hope I've said that right, the capital of the Faroe Islands. He was shortlisted for the CWA John Creasy Dagger for his debut Random. Woo! Has twice been longlisted for the Theakston's Old Peculier Crime Novel of the Year. Woo! I'm going to get sick of doing this after I've introduced Craig, actually. Been both longlisted and shortlisted for the McIlvanney Prize for Scottish Crime Novel of the Year. He's a Sunday Times bestseller and an international bestseller. Woo! Craig is the director of the Bloody Scotland Crime Writing Festival and runs the Butte Noir Festival in Rothesay. His new book, Watch Him Die, is due out next month and is, like Craig himself, split between Glasgow and LA. When police forces 5,000 miles apart uncover a video feed of a young man dying, they realise there's no way to identify him, no way to find him, and no way to save him. Not without the cooperation of a killer. And the only way he will cooperate is if he can watch him die. Just a quick heads up, Craig has asked me to warn you, this passage that he's going to read is not for the faint-hearted. So everybody, Craig Robertson.
Good evening. It's not so much not for the faint-hearted. There's no violence, but there is some swearing. I can't write a book without swearing, it seems. I'm going to read from Watch Him Die. It's not out till June. I've never read this before. I think only about maybe 4 people have even read this chapter. This is chapter 2. I read chapter 1 at Noir at the Bar in Edinburgh 2 weeks ago. As Vic says, the book is split half between Glasgow and Los Angeles. In the opening chapter is set in Los Angeles and a body was found. In chapter 2, we're now back in Glasgow. So I will read from there. It was one of those rare and unpleasant September nights in Glasgow when it was warm as well as wet. Close, as the vernacular would have it. Cool and cold rain they were used to, very used to. Warm rain might have sounded better, but it wasn't. People were splashing along Paisley Road West, trying to avoid the worst of it, but stewing under raincoats. Brows slick with sweat as well as the downpour. Detective Inspector Rachel Neri sat in her car yards from the corner of Lawrence Street and watched them scurry. People covered up for the rain wasn't helping. She needed to see them, heads and all. It was the only way it could possibly work. The puddle splashers came and went, a steady stream of them, to and from the grapes and the Bell Rock across the way, and in and out of the takeaways. They came in 1s and 2s and bigger groups that she didn't much like the look of. If he was in one of those, then she'd have a decision to make. This time of night was always a feeding frenzy in Glasgow. No self-respecting Ouija could go home without filling his or her stomach with salt, grease, and congealed fats. The city's eating habits had undergone a massive overhaul. You could get deep-fried quinoa and avocado these days, but it was back to tried and tested after shutting time. The area was parked just a few yards from Chicken Choice, purveyor of late-night fried food for the discerning inebriate. You didn't have to be drunk to eat there, but it helped. Crucially, a few yards dash through the rain would be considerably shorter than the walk from the grapes. As long as she saw him in good time, then she'd be inside comfortably before he was. She just had to recognise him. As she thought it, 2 men emerged from the pub, one short and slim, swaying under the streetlight, the other much more like what she was looking for, tall, broad, and bullet-headed. It was him. In one movement, she got out of the car, head down, swung the door closed, and clicked it shut as she walked away. She was in Chicken Choice and shaking off the rain before the big guy had got halfway there. She turned away from the door and made a show of looking up at the menu. When she heard the heavy footsteps in the doorway, she knew he'd only be able to see the back of her head. She listened to the sound of his coat flapping and the raindrops falling from it. What can I get you? Server was an older man, sparse grey hair on his head. I'll have the peri-peri chicken for 2, salad with 1 of them. She wondered if the newcomer at the door would recognise her voice. She certainly liked to think so. Hoped he was looking at the back of her head right now with a sinking heart. She made him wait, listening for the sound of his footsteps in case he decided to leave. She heard none. Mary turned as casually as she could, just straightening up after surveying the menu board. She even feigned slight surprise at seeing him standing in the queue. He didn't look at all happy to see her. Tam Harkness had an odd but not unusual shape, not for Glasgow anyway. Fat from the food and muscly from the gym. His body bulged in podginess and in tone. It was all belly and biceps, topped by a neck last seen on a gorilla, and a shaved head punctured with a prominent throbbing vein. This is harassment. I'm phoning my lawyer first thing in the morning. This is fucking harassment. Harassment. Buying chicken is harassment. Let me give you a bit of advice, Tam. Save yourself the hassle and the money. Your lawyer will be laughing up his sleeve as he bills you. I'm buying chicken. You're following me. I was here before you were. That's not following. He took a step forwards, his bulky frame towering over her. You knew I was going to be here. You're sounding very paranoid. Is that the result of a guilty conscience? Bullshit. Neri could see the look of concern on the face of the man behind the counter. She hoped he wasn't thinking of calling the police. I don't think it's bullshit, Tam. It's only natural you'd have a guilty conscience after harming your girlfriend. His eyes widened and his cheeks flared red. The vein on the side of his temple throbbed louder than before. I've told you. I've told you a fucking 100 times. I don't know where she is. I had nothing to do with her disappearing. He was rattled, angry, and losing control, just as she'd wanted. Did you think I was talking about Eloise? I'm sorry. I was talking about Alison Dodds. You remember? You broke her arm and 2 of her fingers. You left her with a black eye and bruised cheekbone. I was talking about your other ex-girlfriend. Unless you'd rather talk about Eloise. That is my Alexa going off in the background. I can only apologise for breaking the mood. Unless you'd rather talk about Eloise. Get to fuck. Please, the man behind the counter was scared now. I don't want any trouble. Please, sir, go now. I'm not fucking going anywhere, Harkness bellowed. I've not done nothing. I'm staying. She can get the fuck out. Please, sir, I'm going to call the police. Mary was ready for that and had her warrant card held high for him to see. I am the police. As this gentleman knows very well, there won't be any trouble, I can assure you. She turned to face Harkness again. So seeing as you brought Eloise up, let's talk about her. Fuck off. We will find out what happened to her, Tam. You know that, don't you? He stood taller, his mouth twitching. Well, I hope so. Do you? He was breathing harder, talking through gritted teeth. Of course I do. Neri turned her head back to the counter where the shop worker stood open-mouthed. Do you know the name Eloise Gray? Young woman from Cardonald who went missing 5 months back. It was all over the papers and the television. Her body found next to her parked car. You remember? The older man nodded wearily, his eyes switching between Neri and Harkness. You'll have seen all the searches that were done, the door-to-door interviews, the appeals and the reconstruction. Maybe you heard how a man was pulled in for questioning, a prime suspect, but how we had to let him go. The shop worker shrugged, scared. See, this gentleman here is Thomas Harkness. Tam used to be Eloise's boyfriend. She broke up with him after he slapped her around, chipped one of her teeth with a backhander. Isn't that right, Tam? He just glared, trapped by the conversation. Tam here didn't take it too well when she ended it. Sent her threatening texts, said he'd hit her harder, said he'd make her sorry she treated him like that. Then she disappeared. All that was left was her blood and her abandoned car. Doesn't look good, does it? Trust me, someone who does what Tam did to a woman, he's done it before, and he'll do it again and again. Can't help themselves, men like Tam. Harkness moved closer, eyes bulging, his neck red as the blood pulsed, his face contorted into a picture of hate. She felt his breath on her face, smelling beer, cigarettes, and bile. You don't know me. Oh yes, I do. I know you, and I know your type. Coward, bully, thug. Those steroids you take for the gym won't be helping with the rage either. I bet you're just busting to lash out right now, aren't you? Aren't you, Tam? He clearly was, but settled for leaning further forwards again to snarl in her face, flecks of spittle landing on her cheek. I wouldn't give you the satisfaction of hitting you. But you want to. Aye, but that's not a crime, not wanting to. You want it so you can arrest me and save you the bother of fitting me up like you've been trying to do. I know that's stupid. She whispered, I think you are. He took a step back to give himself some room and seemed on the verge of proving her right. She steeled herself, but the blow didn't come. Instead, the man's mouth started making words that he couldn't finish, managing just guttural sounds instead. He jabbed his finger at her repeatedly, backing towards the door as he did so. His eyes were reddening for a moment. She thought he was going to cry. Job done, sort of. She turned back to the man at the counter. Sorry about that. Looks like I've just cost you a customer. I guess you never know who you're going to bump into when you're buying supper. It's okay, he told her graciously. I'm thinking maybe he wasn't a good customer anyway. No, she agreed. Not good at all. Mary drove for a few minutes until she spotted a figure sheltering from the rain in a shop doorway. One glance was enough to know he was intending to bed down there for the night. She parked and got out of the car, striding quickly through the rain. He saw her coming, just a kid, probably no more than 17, grey skin and panda patches around weary eyes. She'd no doubt that his street raider pegged her immediately as a cop. It's okay, I'm not here to hassle you, nothing like that. She walked with a plastic carrier bag in front of her, and he eyed it up, doubtless able to smell the contents. Want this? It's from the chicken place up the road, just made, and it's still hot. The boy's brows furrowed. What's wrong with it? Well, it's high in trans fats and saturates, has far too much sugar and salt, and it will play havoc with your blood cholesterol. But it'll probably taste good. He was still confused. Why did you buy it if you didn't want it? She smiled. I just lost my appetite. And that's that. And back to Vic.
Thank you so much for that, Craig. I can't wait to read it. You kind of got me a bit at the end there. I felt a bit of a lump in my throat. Anyway, so final reader of before we go to a break. Nice new hat. Okie dokie. C.L. Taylor. C.L. Taylor is an award-winning Sunday Times best-selling author of 7 gripping standalone psychological thrillers, including Sleep, which is a Richard and Judy book club pick for autumn 2019. She's also written 2 young adult thrillers, The Treatment and The Island, which will be published in January 2021. C.L. Taylor's books have sold in excess of 1 million copies, hit the #1 slot on Amazon Kindle, Kobo, iBooks and Google Play, have been translated into over 25 languages and optioned for TV. Woo! Pretty impressive. Okay, without further ado, everybody, here is C.L. Taylor.
Thank you very much, Vic. So I'm going to read from Strangers, which is my newest book, which came out in hardback on the 2nd of April, ebook and audiobook as well. The book is about 3 strangers whose lives are brought together by a crime in a shopping centre. And the characters are Gareth, who's a security guard, Alice, who's a shop manager, and Ursula, who's a kleptomaniac. I read a chapter before this one for Noir at the Bar, Edinburgh, the other week, where Ursula is in the kitchen that she shares with her landlord, excuse me, Edward, and she's just heard scratching at the basement door. No, Ursula tells herself firmly. There's no way Edward would have advertised for a lodger if he was keeping people prisoner in the basement. Unless, a shiver runs down her spine, unless they were previous tenants. No, not possible. All the missing men were walking by the harbour when they disappeared. If Edward abducted them, he would have had to smuggle them into the house while she was fast asleep in her bed. It doesn't seem possible, although, looking at the dates on the website, one of the men disappeared before she moved in. Feeling vaguely ridiculous, she gets down on her hands and knees, then flattens herself against the kitchen floor, her mouth inches from the basement door. Hello? Can you hear me? The scratching stops, making her catch her breath. Are you... She pauses. She was going to ask, are you human? But that's stupid. What's a rat going to do? Squeak no? If you're imprisoned against your will, scratch the door. There's a beat, then a scratch, scratch, scratch against the wood. Oh, shit. She breathes heavily. Do you need food and drink? Silence, then a strange like someone smothering a sneeze. Ursula backs away from the door, heart pounding in her throat. That has to be a person. She's never heard an animal make a noise like that in her life. Shit, shit, shit. She moves her thumb over the keypad of her phone. 9, 9. She deliberates. What if she's wrong? What if the police come round and there isn't a man tied up in the basement? What if she's got it stupidly, ridiculously wrong, and when they barge down the door, they discover a rat? She'd never live it down, and she's had quite enough people laugh at her in her life. She could ring the RSPCA or pest control instead. No, she can't, because she's got no way of letting them into the basement. But it can't be a rat behind the locked door. And she's never heard a dog or a cat go, ugh, ugh. She needs to find out what's going on in the basement, and she needs to do it alone. If she could just peek through the keyhole or under the door, or... A memory flashes in her mind as she looks towards the kitchen door. She saw a window yesterday when she went outside to rescue the bird. It was half hidden in the gravel against the wall of the house, the glass obscured with the white paint. Ursula kneels on the pebbles at the back of the house, a large rock that she found at the back of the garden on the ground beside her. Hello, she says. I'm going to break the window and get you out. She feels stupid, even if she says it. The window's sealed shut, and she's pretty certain that whoever, or whatever, is in the basement won't be able to hear a thing. Right. She sits back on her heels and picks up the rock. She holds it to her chest like a netball. The glass looks thick, and she's going to have to throw it with some force. Here we go. Before she loses her nerve, she says, 3, 2, 1, and then throws. There's an almighty crash as the rock disappears through the glass, then a boom as it hits the floor. Ursula listens for a scream or a shriek or a moan. When none comes, she snatches up the wooden spoon she took from the kitchen and stabs at the sharp shards of glass still embedded in the window. When the most lethal-looking pieces have fallen away, she places oven gloves on both hands, carefully grips the frame, and eases her head through the gap. Hello? Her voice echoes around the basement. Hello? Is there anyone there? It takes a while for her eyes to adjust to the gloom, and at first all she can see are the stone stairs that lead up to the kitchen and a ton of cardboard boxes. And then she inhales sharply. Oh, holy fuck. That's it. Thank you very much. Back to Vic.
Thank you so much for that, Callie. Okay, we're going to go for a break for you to freshen up your drinks. Don't forget, if you've got any questions for our participating authors, please pop them in the Q&A. If you'd like to win a book, email that email address with the subject heading enter. Talk about us on social media with that hashtag. Simon has told me that it's a new quiz and some of our audience members have had something to do with it. I'm intrigued. So everybody sit back and we'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for that. Okay, Callie, I've actually got a question for you from Effie Merrill. She says, where do you get your persistent inspiration from? Each book brings new and different ideas and themes and never fails. Where do you get your fresh ideas?
Excuse me, I just grabbed a snack because I haven't had any dinner.
Sorry.
It's fine. Where do I get my fresh ideas from? It really varies. Some of my books are inspired by my own fears. Like I drew on that with my earlier books. So the first one, The Accident, was about a sort of controlling psycho ex coming back into somebody's life and ruining it. And I had an ex who was very controlling. And The Lie, the second book, was about toxic friendships and one friend turning everybody else against the main character, which is something that unfortunately I'd kind of experienced a bit as well. And then I kind of started taking a lot of inspiration from news stories. So The Fear, which is about a woman who was groomed by her karate teacher when she was younger, and then later returns to her hometown to find him grooming someone else. That was obviously inspired by the case of the teacher who took his pupil to France. And in that book, in The Fear, he does take her to France. So yeah, it's often news stories, but with Strangers, for example, that came from me thinking I want to write a book about loneliness, about lonely people. And just wandering around my local shopping centre, I just noticed how many people were alone when they were walking around, and there were some older ladies who I'd see every time I'd go there after the school run when I'd pop into Iceland to get some food or whatever. And they just went to say hello to people, and they'd start to say hello to me. And I thought, you know, what if the only interaction that you had in your life was in a shopping centre? And then I thought, and then what if there was a crime? So so it comes from all over. I have no idea what the book after the one I'm writing now is going to be about. Hopefully it'll come when I finish this book.
I'm sure it will. Thank you very much for that. Also, your makeup is getting a lot of love. So well played.
Hold it on.
And Craig is upset. Craig, you're looking smashing. Everybody, don't forget, we are looking for quote of the week. Early frontrunner is deep fried quinoa and avocado, I believe. So, you know, if you hear anything else, please do feel free to throw it in the mix. Okay. This hat is so cumbersome. I miss the ratty tatty hat. Okay, so next reader this evening, Alison Bruce. Alison Bruce is the author of 8 crime novels and 2 non-fiction titles. Her next novel, The Moment Before Impact, will be published in January 2021. So there's 2 books that I've heard of this evening getting published next January. Her work has attracted both critical acclaim and a loyal readership. In 2013 and 2016, Alison was shortlisted for the CWA Dagger in the Library Award. Woo! Alison is a proud supporter of local libraries. She teaches creative writing and is about to complete a BSc in Crime and Investigation at Anglia Ruskin University, Cambridge. I know that Alison today was actually taking part in a moot court. So major thanks, Alison, for making it this evening. Everybody, Alison Bruce.
Hi there. First of all, I'll say I don't normally read aloud, so I might not be an expert at it, and I've up against some stiff competition already. The new book is actually out in October. They've brought it forward. I'm sorry, there's a reflection on my glasses there. They brought it forward to October, and but this was my previous book, The Moment. Oh no, I did it for us. The Moment Before Impact is the next one. I did it for us. It was out in 2018. And I'm reading from the start of the book, and it's written in the first person. It's the only one that I've written in the first person, actually, and so because of that, I thought it might be a good one to read. So, prologue. I never considered suicide. I didn't sit on a bridge parapet or stare into the neck of a bottle of pills. I looked into the future, and I considered every way I might turn, and I don't think I wanted to die, not then. But each choice I faced swelled with hopelessness, and the only achievement by the end of each day was counting the hours that I'd squandered, and being glad I wouldn't have to live them again. I had options. Everyone does. But none that I could face. They filled me with nausea, the feeling of vertigo, and that I remembered from childhood when I'd climbed the rocks by the pier at Clevedon Beach and was too scared to scramble back down. My parents wouldn't help me this time, though. They said they would, but their stiff body language and guarded expressions had said otherwise. And through it all, the only constant was the virus-like thought that told me just to let go, to take control one final time and surrender, to choose nothing over something. Wasn't that what I was doing anyway? To fall, to swallow, to just not bother breathing anymore? I never considered suicide, but in those darkest times, it considered me. It courted me and acted like my only friend. I never sent it packing, but I woke up one day to find that it had tired of me and had slipped away, probably to find someone else. Chapter 1. It took 3 days for my life to fall apart. That doesn't sound a long time to wipe out a marriage, a career, family support, love, finances, security, sanity. I could have said it took 10 minutes, but if I'd kept those 10 minutes to myself, then I wouldn't be where I am today. 3 days to step from one life into another. I'd driven along East Road in Cambridge countless times. I was aware of the building, curved and large with unimaginative cream brickwork and government issue sliding doors. I was certain that it was a multi-storey car park when I'd first noticed. Later I read the signage and registered the lion and unicorn crest above the entrance. The Latin words, God and my right. I never expected the building to mean anything to me. I made myself visit a week before the trial. The doors slid open. A few feet inside stood a security desk and the frame of a walk-through metal detector. A lone security guard stood nearby. He was the only person in view, a wiry and unsmiling man who stared at me until I spoke first. Am I allowed to look around? It's a public building, anyone can go in. I nodded and he checked my bag. Then I slipped through the metal detector and he double-checked by passing an electronic paddle through the air inches from my body. Which way do I go? Just follow the signs, he said, then walked away. I took the stairs and spent the next half an hour without seeing another soul. The newness of the building was reinforced by fresh white walls and unscuffed beige floor tiles. Outside each of the 3 courts were rows of grey metal seats bolted to the floor. The signage was midnight blue, printed with sans serif lettering in a milky white font. The doors along the corridor were all pale beech wood. No 2 items matched, but each was repeated. Doors, signage, thermostats, smoke alarms, again, again, again. The effect was uniformity, but without statement. It left me feeling strangely mute. I thanked the security guard as I left, and my words came out in a whisper. Day 1. We were at the court building in a side room. I was being represented by Dominic Templeton, and he faced me across a small table, which he was using as his makeshift office. I didn't choose him, he was allocated to me, but D.I. Briggs told me to trust him, to tell him everything I could. We never reached the position where I referred to this man as anything other than Mr. Templeton. He was far better educated than me with my single A level, and I felt reminded of this every time he spoke. I could hear myself trying to sound more formal, picking words that I normally wouldn't use and wondering why I didn't have the balls to be myself. Mrs. Sterling? I tried to call me Emily, but he ignored me. He tapped the paper between us. It was a photograph of the clothes I wore that night. They were spread out and arranged with the top and the skirt at the approximate distance apart, as they would have been when I wore them, exposing the skin from the top of my hips to a couple of inches below my bra. You have to be ready to respond to the accusation that you dressed in a provocative manner. We'd been through this discussion before, and now, minutes before my testimony, he'd come back to it. It was a Halloween party, I said. Were all the other women dressed like that? No. Why does that matter? I was there with my husband. Why would I be wary of what I chose to wear? So what you wore was acceptable only because you were with Mr. Sterling. That's not what I meant. As a lone woman, would you have dressed in that way? I opened my mouth to speak, but then changed my mind. Mr. Templeton's attention was both critical and disappointed. You need to avoid opening yourself up to this kind of evaluation. Your choices will be scrutinised. I have the right to dress as I choose. It doesn't equate to an invitation for sexual assault. It shouldn't, he corrected me. But there are incidences when it encourages inappropriate behaviour. Inappropriate behaviour? That's rowdiness or stealing road cones, not this. He sat straight backed, with his fingers woven together in front of him. He stared into the palms of his palms for several seconds before replying. But this isn't one of those cases. Andrew Tyler was a close family friend, and his behaviour, it will be argued, was either out of character or not what you claim it to be. Why are you going over this again now? I asked. Your choice of clothes needs to be out of character too. The court must believe that you didn't dress in order to titillate or encourage the defendant. A court usher opened the door before I could reply. Please come through. I stood immediately. Dominic Templeton gathered his papers with less haste. You're not required yet, Mrs. Sterling, he told me. Don't you have someone who can wait with you? I had family there, but they were already seated in the public gallery, and my instant reaction was to try and hide my disorientation. I'd rather have some time on my own, I lied. He didn't react and said nothing more until he reached the door. The usher held it open and Mr. Templeton looked back in my direction, although his gaze didn't quite meet mine. Remember what we just discussed, Mrs. Sterling. Tread carefully. I couldn't be myself in front of him, and now I couldn't be myself in court either. Being myself was no longer good enough.
Thank you very much, Alison. We're going to stay with you because we have a question from Alex Hawley. Alex would like to know, what's it like writing a novel and doing a degree at the same time?
Well, there were definitely times when I should have been working on my book, and I was learning how to process a crime scene or whatever instead. So it's been a challenge at times, but it's lovely. So this week I'm doing the final edits on my book, and I'm doing my final assessment. So I'm crossing the finishing line with both things in the same week, and that's fantastic.
Well, very well done you. I don't know where you get the time. Thank you very much for joining us. Okay, and I've got a question for Craig here from the Book Trail. Craig, you set your book in two very distinct locations, Glasgow and LA. Was the research the same in both, or did you do it differently?
Quite differently. Glasgow I knew more about to begin with. LA I chose because, as some people watching will know, my wife Alex is from California. We spend a lot of time in LA, so it's probably more fun doing research in LA than in Glasgow. But the contrast between the two places is what makes it work, I hope, for the book, and it makes it interesting. So I was more, I know that in Glasgow I can go in anytime I want and do stuff with, in LA I had to be more concentrated, I had to decide the places I wanted to go to, nice body sites that I could visit, and it had to be picked out in advance.
Excellent, thank you very much for that, thank you. Okay, so back to the hat, the giant hat. I will get better at this, I promise. Somebody's asked if I'm going to model the hat. I don't think I can with my hair like this, but we'll see. CJ Cooke is up next. CJ Cooke is a poet and novelist published in 23 languages. Woo! Her latest book is The Nesting, published by Penguin in the US and HarperCollins in the UK and Commonwealth. Carolyn sent me a really short bio. That was just what she sent me. She is the brains and beauty behind the Stay at Home Lit Fest, which has just completely missed, which was a great, very quickly set up festival when lockdown first occurred. She was also a lecturer of some nobody called Vic Watson a long time ago. Who knows what happened to her? Anyway, without further ado, CJ Cooke.
Oh, thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay? I've decided to wear earphones, yeah? Good, okay. We had some background noise, so I thought I'm gonna, mitigate against that by wearing earphones with a mic. Cool. So I'm going to read from The Nesting. And I have the cover here, which I know is back to front. I can see that it's back to front, so sorry about that. But this it's not published until September in the US and October in the UK, but this will be the UK cover. And this is the proof. So you can see sort of how thick it is, and it'll probably have shiny bits. Anyway, so this book is set in Norway, and I went to Norway 4 times to research, which was, you know, someone has to do that kind of thing. Yeah, so it's about a family who, a British family who go to Norway because the wife's part Norwegian, and they want to build a summer home because the husband's an architect. And so they have this idea that they want to have roots there, and he wants to trial out this kind of high concept eco home. But things go wrong. And I won't say much more than that. I'm going to read from chapter 5. It alternates between first person narration, which was it's in the voice of Lexi, and she's the nanny who is there in the present day, and this is in the past, 6 months previous. And this chapter features Aurelia, who is the wife. So Aurelia sits up in bed and glances woozily at the contraption to her right, the crib. There's a noise coming from it that sounds like an alarm, but something at the back of her mind tells her she can't just reach out and press a button to quieten it down. The room is strange, an arrangement of garish antique dressers and a monstrous wardrobe, and that hideous purple wallpaper with a pattern that resembles moss fluttering against the sky at dusk. Slowly, the foreign shapes and smells shift into familiarity. She moves her legs carefully to the edge of the bed and leans forward to check on the soft, mewling bundle of her daughter, her peachy cheeks and rose petal eyelids dotted with milk spots, a tuft of blonde downy hair springing up from the crown of her head. As always, her tightly bunched fists are held at the side of her head, and she is wrapped caterpillar-like in a turmeric yellow hand-knit blanket gifted from a client. Aurelia watches as Coco drifts back to sleep, then leans forward to ensure the blanket is safely tucked under the mattress. The movement seems to cause her internal organs to slide around the spacious room of her abdomen, and she recalls with a shudder Coco's quick birth back in London just 4 weeks earlier. She'd been at her toddler singing time group with Gaia when the cramp started, but there was still a couple of weeks to go before her due date. Gaia had had to be poked and prodded out of the cozy nest of Aurelia's womb 20 days after she was supposed to be in the world. And even then it took another 71 hours before she begrudgingly emerged, her angry shouts of protest bouncing off the walls of the hospital room. No, it was too early for these cramps to be anything more than Braxton Hicks, she'd thought, as the group sat in a circle and began to sing Row, Row, Row Your Boat. The midwife said false contractions were more common with subsequent children because the body had to work harder, running around after one child while growing another. She asked the group leader for a cushion to make the hard floor more comfortable to sit on, but it didn't work, and when she could no longer sing for pain, she stood up and took Gaia quietly by the hand to their car. She drove home, intent on having a restorative nap with Gaia to ease the cramps, but they grew worse with alarming speed, so that by the time she pulled up into their driveway in Hampstead, she couldn't make it out of the car. "What's wrong, Mama?" Gaia asked, unclipping herself and clambering through to the front passenger seat. She placed her hands on Aurelia's belly and looked at her mother with concern. "Is it the baby? Is she coming?" Aurelia tried to answer, but just then a contraction was building to an almighty peak, rearing like a tidal wave of fire, prizing her jaws open and flowing out of her mouth in one long, agonizing holler. Her waters broke in a terrific gush between her legs and around the foot pedals, and in the ecstasy of the gap between that contraction and the next, she found her mobile phone and dialed for an ambulance. It came 5 minutes later, and the team that raced up the driveway found Gaia standing by the car, hand on hip. "I can see my sister's head," she yelled. "Come quick." A noise makes her glance up. Tom is standing in the doorway, a broad smile across his face, his arms folded and his head cocked in curiosity. She is breastfeeding Coco. She can't remember lifting her out of the crib and putting her to her left breast, the one that always produces more milk, but Coco is feeding nicely and surprisingly, it doesn't hurt. Tom takes a couple of steps across the room and kneels down in front of her. I thought you'd be busy with Clive, she says, wondering what time it is. Are you done for the day? He doesn't answer, but presses his hands into the mattress on either side of her, leaning in to kiss her. She pecks him back, but when he makes to kiss her more passionately, the baby struggles, Tom's weight pushing her into Aurelia's chest. Tom, she says, pressing a hand against his shoulder to ease him away, you'll hurt the baby. But he persists. He straightens his legs and raises his hips, his mouth hard against hers, his tongue searching. She turns her head away in rejection. She is feeding their child, for heaven's sake. Can't he see that? He raises himself to his full height, his eyes blazing. What is wrong with him? She has a urinary tract infection that has knocked her for 6 and she is still bleeding. He knows this, but it seems only his needs matter. Suddenly, without any warning, he swings his arm back and cracks her across the face with all his might. She reels, gasps. Her cheek burns and her eyes brim with tears. She stares up at the horrible, cruel expression on his face and dissolves into tears. Tom, why did you do that? She sits up with a gasp, her heart racing, and looks down into the emptiness of her arms. Where is the baby? A low cry tells her Coco is in her crib, and slowly she realizes that she was dreaming. Thank God it was just a dream. Tom didn't hit her. She dreamed it, and it's over now. With shaking hands, she reaches down the side of the bed and pulls out the red leather-bound diary with AF inscribed in gold lettering. The diary that Tom bought her and in which she records her dreams, as per the midwife's instructions. We want to keep an eye on you, the midwife said. We need to make sure you're well inside and out. She writes the date in the dream. Tom smacked me across the face when I wouldn't have sex with him. She stares at the words on the page and wonders whether she should score them out. The baby's cries get louder, insistent. There, there, baby girl, she coos softly to Coco, lifting her out of the crib and relishing that moment when, as always, Coco rolls her shoulders and bottom back in a big stretch before sensing the proximity of a nipple and widening her mouth like a bird, searching for it. A spear of pain chases right up through the nipple to Aurelia's shoulder, collarbone, and all the way back down to her knees. She groans at the sharp scorch of it as the baby latches on and suckles. Her heart continues to race and her mind reels with images from the dream. The look on his face when she rejected him, the crack of his hand against her cheek. Later, she'll tell him about the dream in wounded tones and he'll hold her close, kiss the exact spot on her cheek where the pseudo-memory still stings. Did you eat some cheese before going to bed? He'll laugh. Coco releases the nipple and sinks back to sleep in Aurelia's arms, satisfied. Aurelia's breast feels smaller, emptied, and she fastens her bra before lifting Coco to her chest and rubbing her back. Unlike Gaia, Coco tends to wind really well, bringing up a healthy belch within a few seconds that tells Aurelia she's ready to be settled back into the crib. But Aurelia cannot sleep. She rises, her head swampy and her body aching, to check on Gaia in her room next door. She sees a foot hanging out of the side of the duvet, a mass of blonde curls, and decides to let her sleep on. Aurelia pads along the wooden floor of the old house. It has all the foreign dimensions of a hotel, and she makes a dreadful creak that she is certain will wake both children. Mercifully, neither stirs. She heads downstairs to the large kitchen, swimming in morning sunlight. The house may yet feel strange, but that is to be expected. She's only been here 8 days and with a brand new baby, and this is not to be their home in any case. This 6-bedroom traditional red painted wooden lodge named Granhus, Norwegian for spruce house, and constructed in the 19th century, will be properly restored after their high concept summer home is built close by. That will be their summer home, and Granhus will become Tom's Norwegian office for his architecture firm. Or a holiday rental, or both. It's big enough for both. Either way, he promised that it wouldn't be their base. She found it creepy when they bought it, and she finds it creepy now. From the window by the sink, she can see fields whitened with fresh snow all the way to the horizon where serrated, snow-dusted mountains soar into the clouds. It's almost Christmas. From the window by the table, the garden sweeps down to a cliff, an ancient forest of towering pine trees gathered on the site of the new building. Beyond that, she can just make out a belt of deep blue, the fjord. We'll get a boat, Tom had said when they came to view this plot of land. We'll take day trips up the fjord, maybe sail all the way to Alison to have high tea, then turn around and head back home for supper. Alison is where her father spent his childhood and where her grandparents lived. They're buried there now, along with aunts and uncles and cousins she never met. It's a charming port town on Norway's west coast, and she has found fond memories as a child walking around the colourful Art Nouveau quarter. Come and see what I found in the shed. The sound of Tom's voice makes her drop the mug she was holding, and it shatters across the floor in a dozen pieces. He rushes forward to gather up the pieces with a dustpan before she steps on them in her bare feet. Are you all right? He says, laughing. Didn't mean to scare you. She recovers, smiles, though her heart is racing. She can still feel the burn of her cheek from where Dream Tom slapped her, the crack in her heart. I found this massive thing in the shed, he says, before she can mention the dream. He tips shards of mug into the bin. Do you want to come and see? She raises her eyes to the ceiling. What about the girls? It'll only take a minute, he says. She slips on her padded coat and a pair of Tom's wellies and traipses after him, out the back door towards the old woodshed at the rear of the house. It's barely 8 in the morning and the forest is carpeted in snow, but it's unseasonably mild, sunlight picking its way through the towering trees all round the house. Be very careful, Tom says, as he approaches the door to the shed. He holds out a hand and she wonders for a moment if a wolf or lynx has got trapped inside. No, he'd have locked her in the house with the girls if that were the case and taken down a gun. She watches, nervous and excited, as he digs his mobile phone out of his back pocket, switches on the torch and shines it inside the shed. She follows after and watches the light as he shines it up to the ceiling. There, he whispers, grinning. Isn't that incredible? At first she thinks she's looking at a ceiling lamp, a kind of Frank Gehry-esque ceiling lamp, conish in shape, about the size of a medicine ball, and patterned with Art Deco swirls in peach and mauve. With horror, she realizes what it is and takes a step back in case its inhabitants wake and come seething out in a frenzy. Hornets, she hisses at Tom, grabbing onto his arm. Wasps, most likely, he whispers back, not taking his eyes off the cone. I'll call pest control, she says, inching backwards, not daring to terrorize away from it. Shame, Tom says. She looks at him as if he's gone mad, so he explains. Well, it's beautiful, isn't it? A perfect papier-mâché cone made by thousands of tiny creatures. To her horror, he reaches up to trace it dreamily with his fingertips. It's a work of natural art, the texture of papyrus, like finding something from an ancient world. You won't be saying that if they sting you, she says. Back in the house, she hangs up the phone, relieved that pest control will be coming imminently to destroy the nest. Tom is still banging on about how they've intruded on the wasp's territory, Anthropocene this, biodiversity that. She'd forgotten how much of Norway feels off limits to humans. Haven't the wasps merely done what we're attempting to do, he says. They're just creating a home for their babies. Vile that the nest should take the shape of a womb, she thinks. With a shudder, she imagines a baby inside, its head lowered into the cone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. I had a brief moment there where I was like, oh yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll go to Norway. I really would like to go to Norway, and then realised I can't. So thank you for that. Okay, we have 2 more readers and then another break. And the next reader is SJI Holliday. SJI Holliday grew up near Edinburgh and used a fictional version of her hometown to set her first 3 books, Blackwood, Willow Walk and The Damselfly. Since then, she's written 4 more books, The Deaths of December, The Lingering, Violet and The Last Resort, which will be out in November. She also writes short stories, and her writing spans across crime, mystery, thrillers with a bit of horror and sci-fi thrown in. She also works as a writing coach, helping new crime writers to finish their books and get published. Oh, and she still has a day job in pharmaceuticals, which I'm guessing at the moment might be quite busy. Tonight, Susi will be reading from Violet, which has recently been optioned for film. Woo! Everybody, Susi Holliday.
Hello. Can you hear me? Cool. I'm going to read from Violet. I was going to read it from my new book actually, but no, I'm not. I'm going to read from this one. So I'm going to skip the prologue because it involves me having to do a Russian accent, which I haven't really practiced. So I'll just go into another chapter. This book is set on the Trans-Siberian Express, and it starts off in Beijing. I'm sitting alone on a concrete bench. Around me, people are swarming, shouting quickly in a language that I can't understand. Above me, the sky is a thick powder blue, like dirty paintbrushes swirled in water. The smog is so dense I can taste it. Waves of panic wash over me as I try to inhale some fresh air, and I wonder how anyone can breathe in this city. What started out as an exciting fun morning has rapidly declined into panic and frustration, and not for the first time, I regret leaving Sam behind in Bangkok. There's something easy about that place, with the swarms of British backpackers and grinning Aussies, men on stag parties, cold beers and menus written in English. Even though Thailand is as far away from the English countryside as it can be, there's a certain warmth, familiarity. Despite all the stories you hear, I felt completely safe there. But then me and Sam had that stupid falling out in the hotel lobby. I can't even remember how it started. And so here I am, sitting outside the Beijing International train station. No boyfriend, only half my luggage, since my rucksack went AWOL somewhere on the way to China. And still no ticket for the train I want, which leaves tomorrow morning. I could call Sam, beg for his forgiveness, ask him to follow me out here. But firstly, I know he doesn't want to. And secondly, I'd only be doing it out of desperation. He got sucked in Thailand. Didn't want to follow the plan, my plan. Look back via China and the Trans-Siberian Express to Moscow before flying home from there. He'd gone into an internet cafe and resigned from his job. He was getting more excited than I liked by the cheap beer and the hordes of stunning young women that seemed to flock to him on a daily basis. I'd just like to hang out here a bit longer, he'd said. Line up, sweetheart, you need to smoke some more weed. Idiot. He'd changed since the group of German students arrived. There'd been a wild night. I'd felt uneasy, but he'd felt the opposite. This is the kind of fun I came for, he said. To them, not me. I knew then that my Sam was gone. Was I angry? Not really. I just hope he stayed sober enough to do the appropriate checks on some of those beautiful women that he and the German lads were spending so much time with. Now I'm alone in Beijing, a bustling metropolis of nearly 22 million people, feeling properly homesick for the first time in months. I did have fun yesterday, going for a proper Chinese tea ceremony with a young couple I'd met in the gardens near the Forbidden City. The tea had been ridiculously expensive, and I'd realised early on that it was a scam of some sort, but as scams go, it was pretty friendly. And I know more now than I ever thought I needed to about the many different kinds of Chinese tea. This morning I was buzzing, ready for another full-on day, making sure I could fit in as many crispy duck pancakes as I could manage. All I had to do was pop down to the train station and buy my ticket. The station is huge. The guidebook said, but buying a ticket should be simple. Just make sure you go to the international section. When they said it was huge, I hadn't realised what that meant. But while I sat outside, waiting for the sun to push its way through the ever-present smog, it didn't, by the way, it dawned on me that small towns in China have 5 million inhabitants, and that huge really means the station is the size of Manchester. And after walking around the whole place for 2 hours, being jostled and stared at, pointed out, and misdirected for hours on end, what I realised was that foreigners can't buy international tickets in the station after all. They have to go to a travel centre in some business hotel streets away. And I am so over this now, this so-called adventure. And so I sat myself down on this concrete bench, and all I want to do now is cry. But that's not going to get me anywhere. Certainly not to Moscow, where it's where I really want to be. I need to move on, find another companion for my trip. So I take a swig of water, and I pick up my backpack and head back into the throng. The Beijing International Hotel is seriously plush. Marble pillars, velvet sofas. There's a long black bar made of smooth, sparkling granite. A good-looking Chinese man with neatly gelled hair is standing behind it, polishing glasses. I could sit there, ask him to mix me a cocktail, something classic, old-fashioned, like a brandy Alexander, then sip it seductively and see who might come in and offer to buy me the next. But that's for another time. I don't want to stay here alone in this city full of noise and smog. It's too big, too impersonal. There's a reason why most backpackers follow a trail, go to the same places. I'd always thought that wasn't for me, and yet here I am, alone, and I'm not happy about it at all. I'm kidding myself if I think I prefer my own company. What I need now is a new friend, a replacement for Sam. I pause, thinking again about the barman. No. What I need more than anything is a ticket out of this place, and I just have to hope that my bag turns up before I move on. I looked down at my skirt, wondering why I'd chosen this particular look for the flight. I bought a load of things in Bangkok, thinking I might head to the beach before moving on, but that never happened. And now I look like a goddamn hippie. I don't fit in here in this hotel. But without the rest of my clothes and my hair stuff and everything else I need, I'm just going to have to style it out. I suppose I would just have to be who this outfit suggests. The hotel travel centre is a small room filled with too many rubber plants. There's a small leather sofa and one desk where someone was being served by a beautiful Chinese woman with her hair pinned up with chopsticks. I've seen this before, but not on someone wearing a navy business suit. I like the contrast. The air conditioning is on full and I'm relieved to be out of the thick, sticky heat. But after a few moments, I'm already feeling a chill in my legs. I watch the woman with the chopsticks, smiling and nodding at the customer. Blonde, hair in a messy ponytail, shorts, backpack on the floor. Another traveller. Another me. I hope so. So you're saying I can't get any sort of refund on this, even though I booked it 6 months in advance? Chopstick nods again. So sorry, we cannot do it. The blonde sighs in frustration. It's an expensive ticket. I did call before I left the UK and I was told you could deal with it here. Chopstick shakes her head gently. She's still smiling. The blonde stands up. Fine, she says. I assume the ticket is transferable. If I can get someone else to take it. You can do that, yes. Chopsticks is beaming now. All sorted and she didn't have to do a thing. The blonde hitches her backpack onto her shoulders, giving me a wry smile and a massive eye roll as she leaves the room. Chopsticks is heading towards the door at the back. I glance up at the clock. The minute hand ticks and the hour hand clicks into place at the top. 5 o'clock. I jump up off the sofa. Wait, I need to buy a ticket. Sorry, we're closed now, Chopsticks says, her smile dipping just a little. We open 9 a.m. No, I need to get the ticket now. The train's at 7:30 tomorrow. She frowns. You want Trans-Siberian? Yes. Yes, please. No ticket left. Come back tomorrow. And you get a ticket for another date, okay? It's not okay, but she's disappeared through the back. Shit. I grab my bag and slink out of the room, beaten. For another brief moment I want to cry, but I bite it back. Looks like I'm going to be getting to know the barman after all. There are a few others in the bar area now. A couple of businessmen in suits on the high stools at the bar. A tanned couple with umbrella drinks and their faces stuck in a lonely planet. The blonde is sitting on her own, a tall glass of beer in front of her. She's gazing out of the huge windows, watching the hordes of ant-like humans going about their business. I hesitate, not sure whether to approach her, but before I can make up my mind, she turns around and sees me. She looks confused just for a second, then she smiles. Hey, you were in the travel centre, weren't you? Did you get sorted? I shake my head. Sold out. I need to rethink my plans. She just stares at me, saying nothing, and I stand there feeling a bit awkward. That beer looks good. I smile at her, nod towards her glass. The condensation is trickling slowly down the sides, and suddenly I am so thirsty I have to fight the urge to pick it up and sink it in one. When did I last have a cold drink? The water in the bottle I've been lugging around with me all day is so hot now I could probably use it to make tea. Tsingtao, she says. Sounds all exotic back home, but it's cheap and nasty here, even in this place. Mind if I join you? She moves her laptop over to the far side of the table and gestures towards the empty seat opposite. Be my guest. I barely sat down when a smiling woman appears at my side, asking me what I want to order. I return the smile and point at her beer. One of these, unless you want another? The blonde shakes her head. Not yet. Thanks, though. I'm Violet, I tell her. Carrie, she says, offering me a small, lightly tanned hand. So where are you trying to buy a ticket for? The woman returns with a tray. We wait patiently while she lays down a white paper coaster with a frill around the edge and places a glass carefully on top. Then she lifts a bowl of unshelled peanuts off the tray and places it down in the middle of the table. She smiles and gives me a small half bow, and I thank her and take a long drink. It tastes like heaven and I already feel more relaxed. I wanted to get the Trans-Siberian. I wasn't fussed about which branch as long as it gets me to Moscow. I'm supposed to be meeting friends there. The last part is a lie. I have no particular reason to want to go to Moscow other than I haven't been yet, and I'm getting a bit bored of Asia. It's all a bit predictable after a while. Same sorts of people on the trail, doing the same things. I think Russia might spice things up a bit, take my mind off Sam, and everything else. It's not like I've got anything to rush back to the UK for. Oh, cool, me too, Carrie says. Then, oh shit, sorry. You just said you couldn't get a ticket. She slaps herself on the head, then laughs. Let's have a few drinks. You can forget about it for now.
Thank you very much, Susie. Thank you for doing that. We have a question for CJ Cooke here from the book trail. What kind of research into Norway/Norwegian themes did you do with this book?
Well, that's a big question, or at least it has a big answer. So I went to Norway. I was lucky to get an Arts Council grant, and I went over to Norway and went on a ship. And I felt that I had to research via my feet and to be in the place that, because the environment is so important and the wildness of that place plays such a huge role in the book. I not just in creating atmosphere, but in terms of the story. I really needed to go. I couldn't just research it empirically. I needed to be there, and actually it was the experience of being there that fed through in various ways into the book, just in terms of little moments and characters that enriched it, I think. But I did research specifically Norwegian architecture, and I went to the Nordic Office of Architecture to ask about like all the logistics around, you know, if Tom's building this high concept eco house, I needed to sort of know what hoops he'd have to jump through. So that was sort of the main, you know, sitting down in an office and speaking with the co-director of the Nordic Office of Architecture. So yes, but it was a wonderful trip.
Excellent, thank you very much for that. And we've got a question from Lisa Gray for Susie. Oh, and then another one for Susie from Derek. So Lisa Gray asks, Susie, who would be your dream casting for the roles of Violet and Carrie?
Oh my God, that's too hard. I got sent a sort of suggested load of actresses for them from the producer, and it's just too many. There's just so many good actresses that could play them both, so I can't even answer that, sorry.
That's so exciting. And from Derek Farrell, your previous book, The Lingering, was crime mixed with supernatural, while Violet is out and out psychological suspense, and brilliant, by the way. What are the links? Do both of them have characters in common, plot, your own experience?
Well, both of them are based on places that I've been, because in The Lingering, I spent a bit of time in a commune to research writing that book. And obviously Trans-Siberian Express, I did that as part of my research. Oh, cool. But I think they're both linked. I think they're both linked by just the general kind of the characters, the kind of characters that I like writing that are sort of a bit mysterious, and they're not obvious villains.
Excellent, thank you very much for that. Thank you. So we have one more reader for this part of the evening. And it is Quentin Bates. A long time ago, Quentin Bates washed up in Iceland, more or less by accident, and has been tied to that lump of snow-covered volcanic rock in the middle of the Atlantic ever since. He writes his own series of crime novels set in present-day Iceland, as well as having translated books by Lilja Sigurdardóttir, Ragnar Jonasson, and Einar Karason. Next in the queue is Solveig Pálsdóttir's The Fox. So everybody, lovely, lovely Quentin Bates.
Thank you. This is from the book that will be published in, next month. I haven't actually received a copy of it yet, so I can't hold up a cover like everybody else. I've heard it said that there's only two kinds of crime stories. There's a stranger rides into town and a man walks into a bar. And this one is the stranger rides into a town variety. A gentleman is able to fake his own death very successfully, and he spent a long time living somewhere warm with a beautiful girlfriend and a great job for many years. But after a while, reality comes calling and he needs to go home. And of course, that's when things start to go wrong. And my rotund heroine and her sidekick have to take a hand as well. So we'll start with where Ingvar Sturluson makes his momentous spur of the moment decision. And this is December 2004 to start with. He didn't see the carnage for himself. Afterwards, he thought back to it whenever the past kept sleep at bay, convincing himself that he had experienced the fear as the savage blue sea crashed onto the beachfront houses and hotels, sweeping cars, people, shacks and stalls before it, and then sucking them back in its grasp as it retreated. He was sure he could hear the screams, the frantic calls, the wailing as people's homes and loved ones vanished in the churning water. He had seen it, but from the comfort of a bar, watching it on the tinny TV set fixed high on the wall, wondering if it was a hoax, and then recognizing on the screen the hotel where he'd left his wife. 3 children, and the mother-in-law he'd always disliked from a not always polite distance. She was the real reason he hadn't been sober for 3 days and was in a bar a dozen miles from the beach. Cutler had made it plain that a holiday was needed for them to bond as a family, the unmistakable subtext to the demand being that if there were no holiday, then Ingvar might as well start looking for love elsewhere, because she would. So he arranged a 3-week break, and then found that Cutler's mother had also booked the same 3 weeks at the same hotel. They'd even been on the same flight, for crying out loud. It was more than a man could stand. Every day he spent less time with the family, leaving the children to romp in the pool or laze in front of the TV, and his wife and her mother to shop and bask in the sun, while he snatched a holiday of his own, drinking with a couple of German guys who found themselves in much the same situation. He ordered another beer, having to call to the barman, who, like the rest of the handful of people in the place, stood mesmerised by the grainy footage being replayed over and over and the manic non-stop commentary. As the scale of the disaster unfolded in snatches of news bulletins, he felt a warm surge of anticipation, the chance he'd already been planning for. He raised a silent glass to himself. Happy New Year to me. It was time to start walking. And then we run to 2010. Erik Petter Thalleson didn't struggle as a strong hand covered his nose and mouth for far longer than was needed to end his life. But the man in the white coat wanted to be absolutely certain. He reflected that the unfortunate man had probably at most only a week or 2 to live, and he was doing him a favour by cutting short the painful process. It didn't do any harm. There was a handsome bonus coming his way for helping this wreck of a man out of this world, so his name could live on without him. The hostel was silent. At 3 o'clock on a rain-battered winter Tuesday night, few people were about, and the grey van was parked out of sight at the back of the hostel where the CCTV couldn't quite make out the number. That's everything, the pale-faced man with the accent and the sharp eyes, scanning both Jens and the back door of the hostel, asked. Belongings, such as they are, birth certificate, Danish passport, social security paperwork, identification number, Jens said, a finger pointing at the 10-digit code. That's all there is. No family, no visitors? Jens shook his head. He's been here on and off for the last 8 months. No pals other than a few other junkies. He's never had a visitor, and nobody ever asked about him. Criminal record? Sorry, can't help you there. At any rate, the police haven't been to see him, so I guess he's as clean as any lifelong smackhead's ever likely to be. He's only in his 30s, the man said in surprise, riffling the pages of the dog-eared passport. Yeah, and he looks twice that. I'm amazed he lasted as long as he did. The pale man shivered in his thick coat and nodded to his broad-shouldered friend, who effortlessly swung the zipped grey bag containing Erik Petter Thallekson's earthly remains onto the back of the van. Now it was Jens's turn to shiver at the scant respect shown to the dead man, but the bulging envelope he stuffed into his trouser pocket overcame any qualms. Need any more? He asked hopefully. Yeah, the pale man said after a moment's pause. Not right away. Give me a call when there's a suitable candidate, someone who's not going to be missed. Jens wondered if he should have put out a hand to be shaken at the conclusion of a business deal they were both satisfied with, but decided against it. The van disappeared into the rain and he made his way back to the warden's office to pour himself a celebratory mug of coffee and wait for his shift to be over. Anything exciting? Eva Britt asked when she turned up at 6 to take over. Not much, Jens yawned. Oh, Erik Petter left. He left? She frowned. He's in no condition to be out on his own. I tried to convince him he was better off here, at least until daylight, Jens said sadly, but he wouldn't have it. He was adamant he was getting the train over to Copenhagen for Christmas. Home to Denmark? I guess so. He didn't have any money. How was he going to get home if he didn't have the train fare? I don't know, Jens said, injecting as much regret as he could into his voice. Maybe he'll be back if he gets chucked out of the station. You didn't lend him the train fare, did you? Everbritt asked, head cocked on one side. Jens made himself look guilty. You shouldn't, you know. She tousled his hair fondly and sighed. You know what these people are like. Well, I'll get his room cleaned today, and I suppose it won't be long before there'll be some other lost soul needing it. Let's hope not, Jens said. And from there, we can move on to present day. Sometime this year, before lockdown. This is Helgi, the policeman who works with Gunhildur at an airport somewhere in Europe. Helgi felt hot and even more uncomfortable as he waited at the bar, his patience wearing thin, until the barman finally approached, his expression asking wordlessly what Sir would like to drink. Helgi opened his mouth to speak, but the voice was someone else's. Brandy, double. The gruff voice at his side ordered with the authority of someone used to being listened to. Helgi turned, ready to argue that he'd been waiting for what felt like the best part of a day for the last beer of an exhausting holiday that had left him longing to get back to work. Hey, pal, he began as the barman took a glass from the rack overhead and poured. What were you waiting? Said a bronze man with a face that looked as if it had been chipped from rock, glancing down at Helgi, who felt suddenly inadequate in his baggy shirt and with the skin peeling from the top of his sunburned head. I was waiting, Helgi said, until you jumped in. Sorry, bud, the man said, dropping a 20-euro note on the bar and placing a finger on it. He nodded his head sideways in Helgi's direction. Get this gentleman a drink as well, would you? Disarmed, Helgi's frustration evaporated. Oh, thanks, I'll have a brandy as well. Make it a double, the stranger ordered, lifting his glass in salutation. Your health, he said in a grave voice. He sipped, rolled the spirit across his tongue for a moment, savouring it, then threw the rest down his throat in one swift motion. He replaced the glass on the bar, nodded, and walked away without waiting for his change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've had a bit of a request from the other panel members. At least once a week we get cat bombed by somebody's cat in the background during the reading. Somebody this evening's reading is over, but he's been cat bombed. Hello, Craig Robertson. Now, this is a side you often don't see, a bit of a softer, cuddly side.
Well, I try not to show it, but I'm afraid he's ruining my reputation I do have. This is Clooney. He came from, oh, it's okay. He has a mind of his own. He came from Los Angeles or from California 6 years ago. And he now has a Scottish accent. And yeah, he's my writing partner.
And the way you look at him, it's true love, that's for sure. We do, thank you for sharing that. We do have a question for Quentin from Louise Fairbairn. Does your translation work affect your own writing or vice versa? Or does each offer a break from the other?
Translation is a break from writing. No, the two are very, no, it's no problem to keep the two separate. So I can pick up one and then go to the other. It's same toolbox, but a different set of tools.
Although I do know that you are more likely to push the work of the people you've translated for than your own.
Yeah.
Which is why I make you do events like this.
Yeah, but Lilia's stuff is so good.
And you just won't hear the praise. Thank you very much for that. Okay, yeah. We've got 5 minutes for another one of these new quizzes. Hashtag VNATB. If you haven't already entered, please do. There's no obligation, but you know, you could win a free book. And we'll be back with our final 3 readers after this.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to the final part of this evening's virtual Noir at the Bar. Three chaps left in the hat actually. All the ladies have been and gone. That's my cricky floorboards, don't mind me. Okay, so sometimes you just miss the bar, don't you? Anyway, next up is A.M. Peacock. A.M. Peacock, Adam to his pals, is the author of the DCI Jack Lambert series, a police procedural set in and around Newcastle. Whoop, whoop. He is also a member of the Northern Crime Syndicate, a group of Northern crime writers who are looking to take over the world. When he isn't sitting staring at a wall during lockdown, he is doing his best to convince his cat to show him some affection. So far, this endeavour hasn't been as successful as Craig Robertson's. So everybody, A.M. Peacock.
Hello. Yeah, my cat was in the background, strategically placed, but he's decided to go away. If he has gone out, he may come in and start screaming, so I apologise if that happens in advance. Yeah, I feel like my bio's a little short, so I'll include my 25-metre swimming certificate from 1996 and my bronze attendance certificate from 2001 at Heart and Technology College in there, because I like to think that's what got me my first job at my local library. So I'm going to read from what I think is definitely, well, it's the definition of a work in progress, really. So the first book in the series is Open Grave, and that's kind of opens up with a bit of gangland torture. We've got a serial killer on the go, gangs, and a local celebrity. Jack, the main character, is a bit of a rogue, what we call in Newcastle a Raji, but he likes to repress that along with everything else in his life. Grave Intent opens with a bit of pitchfork torture on a farm. And in keeping with what we've discussed so far, this third one here has a cat in it, so that's one thing, a little bit different from the other two. And this is, so the third book in the series will be out this year. I'm saying that, you know, let's see. And this is kind of, we'll call it edited. It would have been more edited, but I have been watching normal people, and I'm emotionally wrecked, and so can't actually function as a human right now. Or think of titles for the third book. So if anybody has any ideas of riffing on the grave thing, please put them in the comments, and I'll just use one because, you know, I need a title for the third book. So here we go. Bear with us. She rolled over, and the bed springs shrieked out an elderly tune in response. It was hot, much too hot for this time of year. So hot, in fact, that she'd had to leave the window open earlier on. It was a risk given the neighbourhood. Sure, nobody would get up the first floor window of her flat, but the cyclical screams and subwoofer booming that went on in the nearby houses often served to keep her awake at night. Tonight was different, though. It was as if the street had collectively decided to hold its breath. That, or the fact that at 3 a.m. they'd all finally gone to bed. She watched as the angry red digits changed on the digital clock face from 3 to 3:01. She sighed, rolled over once more, pulling the duvet down her body another 6 inches. Clock watching was her favourite pastime during the night. She knew she should have gotten rid of the damn thing, but it was one of the few things she had left from before, when he was still here. She would have smiled at the memory had it not been for the way things had ended. The bastard had seen fit to trade her in for a younger model. She snorted out loud. Wasn't like he was some kind of Brad Pitt lookalike either. Her mother had called him unconventionally attractive. She still wasn't sure what that was supposed to mean. She realized she was grinding her teeth together as the memory of him washed over her. She reached out instinctively across the bed, but found only a cool space where he'd once lain. Unfortunately, the memory of him was fading nowhere near as fast as the groove in the medium soft mattress they had purchased from IKEA, a present for her 20th birthday. She rolled over and clamped her eyes shut, as if the memory would somehow evaporate out of her ears if she concentrated hard enough. No such luck. She knew she was in it for the long haul now. Another day at work in her dull-as-dishwater job with scratchy eyes and unkempt hair. It was the looks she couldn't stand, their pity. Colleagues who had seen her at a happier time before he'd run off with his receptionist. She planted a fist on the side of the bed that had been his, her hand making a dull thwack against the mattress. Yet again, tears were threatening to make an appearance. Living alone meant that it didn't technically matter whether she cried, but after a near-nervous breakdown 6 months ago, she'd made a promise to herself that she'd never shed another tear over him. She suppressed a smile at the memory of him having come crawling back 9 months after he left. She'd taken great pleasure in ultimately refusing his advances on that occasion. The reality was, though, that her insides had been screaming at her to give him another chance. An inner strength she hadn't known existed had made its presence felt, and somehow she'd managed to deny him. He hadn't been happy. Tough shit, she thought. She took a sick sense of pleasure in knowing that the young girl, Candace something or other, had left him for somebody of her own age. Knowing that Carl had only come back once he'd been dumped had been one step too far for her. The sound of the door whooshing open ever so slightly brought a smile to her lips. This was one reminder of the time before that she didn't resent. They'd bought Alfie, a former stray from a local shelter, together some 3 years ago. When Carl had left, she told him in no uncertain terms that the cat was staying with her. She knew he loved that cat, and the thought that she'd somehow wounded him pleased her. That smug relief had long since passed. The truth was, she was just as fond of Alfie herself. Every night around this time, he would headbutt her door open and pad his way into the room before jumping on her bed and performing a car engine impression next to her ear. She waited for it, sending out the obligatory pss, pss, pss as she did so. But Alfie didn't come. She tried again, this time louder. Nothing. She frowned and ruffled the bed sheets, her go-to trick when she wanted attention from the ginger menace. Still nothing. Oh well, she muttered. The temperature finally began to drop, and so she pulled the duvet up over her head. Knowing Alfie was in the room gave her a sense of serenity. She could feel the lure of sleep taking her over now, eyes drooping into a dark abyss. Perhaps she would get a few hours in before work after all. Her eyelids flew open. What was it? A noise? Something wasn't right, but she didn't know what. Perhaps it had been a bad dream. She brought her hand up to her chest and could feel the thumping of her heart through the 10-tug duvet. Although cold now, she was sweating. What was it that had spooked her? She reached out to the bedside table for her water, but realized she must have forgotten to pour herself a glass before going to bed. Accepting the dehydration, she rolled over again and closed her eyes. She was almost asleep once more when she remembered what it was. The door, she thought. It wasn't right. But why? Alfie had pushed it open like always. But perhaps he'd gotten bored, as most cats do, and slunk off elsewhere. No, that wasn't possible. The memory scratched at her insides, begging to get through the fog. No, it definitely wasn't possible. But why? Because she'd left Alfie out of the flat before she went to bed and hadn't let him back in. She stifled a cry as realization hit her. If Alfie was outside, who was now in her room? She sat bolt upright. Who's there? She half whispered. Silence. She could see the outline of the door stood ajar. She definitely pulled it further shut than that when she went to bed. She hadn't dreamt it. Somebody had opened the door. This isn't funny, she called, straining to keep her voice level. Her acting skills were average at best, though. She strained against the sound of the outside breeze to hear any sign of movement. Nothing. The sound of padded footsteps sent waves of panic through her before Alfie suddenly jumped up into her lap. Alfie, she cried, snuggling him against her. You daft bugger. She settled back into bed and waited as her cat did his merry dance around her before coming to settle at her feet. Her heart rate began to retreat to its normal BPM. You're losing the plot, she told herself. Alfie's soft purring acted as white noise to her, and within minutes she felt herself drifting off again. She'd been so sure that she'd let him out, though. Her mind was obviously playing tricks on. No, she told herself. You're not losing it. You definitely let him out. She could remember now, his incessant cries by the front door, her sighing and letting him out into the night, admonishing him for not going out earlier. She could even remember the vacant look he'd given her. She'd hissed at him like some kind of rival Tom. There was no way he could be back inside now. She felt her body jerk awake and she sat up in bed. Alfie, sensing distress, darted for the door and padded off into the night. She fumbled for the light switch by her bed, but found her clammy hands unable to grab it on the first try. Her eyes were adapting to the night now. So distracted had she been by the sound of the door moving, she hadn't taken the time to look to the other side of the room. The shadow moved from the corner. Eyes wide, she watched as it landed on Carl's spot on the bed. A firm gloved hand planted itself over her mouth, stifling her scream. She could taste the rough, cracked leather. The smell of damp earth was overbearing. And then something else, a glint of metal, pressure on her neck. In her peripheral vision, the clock changed to 3:14. 1:15 never came. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Adam. Okay, Quentin, got a question for you from Mark. Do you think this corona crisis will influence future crime writing as it creates a different way of looking at daily life?
I've no idea.
I was hoping you were going to get your crystal ball out and answer it.
I was just going to have a quick look at the tea leaves, but it's going to date stamp things. From now on, things are going to be before Corona and after Corona. The book I've just finished, the one I've just read from, should have been taking place under Corona.
Mm. That's really interesting.
Which is really strange, because the guy shouldn't have been able to fly to Iceland because it was all closed.
Oh. Do you think you'd include it in the future or not?
I don't know if I'm brave enough.
I'm going to come to everybody and ask the same question, because I've been listening to a lot of podcasts and stuff, and people have very definite ideas on that. So, right, Adam, would you include Corona, or would you just gloss over it?
What, in my writing, yeah?
Yeah.
I would probably be willing to include it, but in a glossed over kind of way, like it was 3 months ago when we couldn't do anything. I mean, I don't know. I sort of feel like it will be getting used, so I want to sort of avoid it, but I do make mention of some topical things in the books because it is modern day, so maybe gloss over it, yeah.
I think that's very optimistic of you to say, 3 months ago we weren't allowed to do anything.
Yeah, I'm talking in 10 years' time.
Oh, that's okay. Thanks for clarifying that. Mr. Robertson, what are your thoughts?
Well, the book that I'm writing now should be set now. So it's either you go all in or you ignore it. There's no halfway on this. For example, my characters go to a pub. You can't go to the pub. They're out meeting strangers. None of this could happen. So I think what I'm almost certainly going to do is move the book back a year and set it in 2019. So I don't think you can pretend you're in an alternate universe, but I think I'm going to have to move it back one. Otherwise, I'd have to start the book again. Yeah. And I'm not starting the book again.
I think that's very fair. Susi, what say ye?
Well, the one that's out in November is all done, so it's just going to be set when it's set, which is just prior to Corona, I think. But the one that's out for next year, that's already partly written. So I partly wrote that last year, and then due to what the publisher wanted to do, the other book was written first. So I've got to go back to that one, and I had it all planned, and now I'm like, oh. So I think I am going to kind of bring it in, but because I can't say too much, but it will kind of be able to fit into the plot a little bit. So the only thing is, I'm kind of hoping that by the time I need to hand this book in, we'll have a bit more of an idea of what's going to be happening in the next 6 months or so. So at least I can kind of say that.
We've got some quite good ideas here. Ella has said it would be interesting for a bottle episode or locked room mystery, seeing as we can't go anywhere. And Kirsten McKenzie says she can almost imagine a whole stable of books completely ignoring the year 2020. So, Tony, what's your thoughts? Tony Kent.
Hello. My book that I'm going to read from shortly is actually set in 2020, but it begins at the very end of January and ends at the very beginning of February. So luckily, we've completely managed by pure fluke to avoid it. However, my next book, book 4, I was a third of the way into writing book 4, and book 4, by pure fluke, bad luck in fact, was all about a pandemic that had been used by a rogue Asian nation as a weapon against the United States. So I decided it was probably best not to write that now. It might not be the time. And I started again at the beginning of last month. So I've had to talk to my publishers about pushing back my my deadline so I can start from scratch. I've actually set up, I think I spoke to you about this before, I set up a YouTube channel just because I had basically one line of an idea. I've accidentally called it a germ of an idea too many times, which is probably a bad thing to call it at the moment. And I've set up a YouTube channel documenting the writing of this one-line idea and the way it grows. And what's interesting about that is that initially it was, there's going to be no coronavirus in this book, because the bastard thing made me have to throw away a third written book. And actually, as it's gone on, it's not set during the coronavirus. It's set in 2021, pardon me. But the way in which it's been dealt with by my fictional administration is now a really key part of the book. So I think when you actually sit down and you go for it, it might be unavoidable, because I really wanted to avoid it. And yet it's now a key part of the book.
Yeah. Michael, would you avoid it? Would you go for it?
Well, broadly speaking, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
So broadly speaking, I don't think writers should saturate their work with topical stuff. I mean, if you look at the late 16th century writers and early 17th century, you had plague, and more or less endemic to Britain. They barely write about it. It's plague there all the time. They don't write about plague. But with this one, it actually starts off with a stomach virus.
Oh, gosh.
Right. The protagonist's wife gets a stomach virus from the sea off the Costa del Sol. That's a metaphor for the social corruption of the book. So we've got the virus in early here, yeah?
I kind of feel like we've got a lot of soothsayers on the panel this evening. Carolyn, would you include it, or would you just try and ignore the fact that it's happened?
I'm a wee bit. I'm probably, yeah. I don't think everyone should shift their dates. I remember Sarah Hall's book, The Wolf Border, and she casually had it that Scotland had achieved independence. And it wasn't anything to do with the narrative. It was just what she decided, that her world of the story was going to have an independent Scotland. And I just don't see that we the reader suspends disbelief. So I'm just not. I don't think it needs to be. If I'm reading a book that takes place in 2020, I'm not going to be kicked out of the story if the person doesn't give me a blow account of the pandemic. So I'm not bothered.
Good for you, thank you. And I think our mystery man behind the controls, Simon, had something to add into this.
Well, Boris Johnson's dad's trying to get his book back in publication, isn't he, that he wrote about 20 years ago. I think there's going to be a rash of using it as a murder device for getting inheritance. And if my mum and dad are watching this, that's not why I'm bringing you shopping each week. But I think there will be some crass uses of it in that way. But I think, yeah, there's going to, I think it'll be used in a similar way to 9/11 has been used.
Okay, thank you for that. Gosh, we've got a nice little discussion going on. That's not very noir at the bar. Usually happens afterwards when everybody's having a tipple or two. Okay, so we've got two names in the hat now. And there it goes. There goes one. Michael Nath. Rhymes with Bath, I've been reliably informed. Thank you.
Raff, but not Roth.
Thank you. Michael's first novel, La Rochelle, was shortlisted for the James Tate Black Memorial Prize for Fiction. His second novel, British Story, a Romance, was a Morning Star Book of the Year. Ooh. The Treatment, his newest book, has been described as mad and marvellous, beautifully vulgar, a London novel to join the greats, bold, skillful, entertaining and wild, and a maverick project that defies comparison. So everybody prepare yourselves. Here comes Michael Nath.
Okay. We read from The Treatment, which was published in March. So the narrator, can you hear me okay? Yeah? Yes, the narrator of the book, he gets involved in a revenge plot against the suspects of a notorious race murder. He sort of joins a revenge team. In this episode, which is episode 30 of the book, the revenge team, they go to a pub in southeast London in Shooters Hill. They're trying to track down one of the suspects in the murder. Earlier this evening, they tried to kill him in a car while he was fishing in a gravel pit, but he escaped them. So they go into the pub, and I've got to say the Revenge team is quite sort of multicultural, so to speak. And the main player in this episode, it's amongst the Revengers, is a man called J. Fabian Morgan. He's a one-eyed stand-up humorist, not comic. His nickname, his stage name is the Cunctator, and he lost an eye to an associate of the suspects in the original crime. It's an offensive piece. I mean, quite a lot of the book's offensive, and my attempts to do accents are going to be especially offensive. I've got 108 people in this book. I can't do the voices of any of them. But let's have a go anyway. Okay, in the White Cross, Shooters Hill. You can hear me, yeah? Yeah. Can you turn that down, my man? Said Morgan, like we were waiting for a train. We don't like 90s pop. You don't like the music, you can go back where you came from, the landlord told him. Careful, it wasn't all of us. You won't be missed. Where's your top boy? Morgan said. We've come to see him. Don't know what you're talking about. Under his chin, the landlord had a wattle. He did know, maybe knew as well as it happened one day, what you get for serving the notorious, making them feel at home. Sightseers, crime buffs, toadies, campaigners. And one day, a motley crew with a heavy manner. I checked Hanley. Hanley was at the theatre. Ah, said Morgan, you don't know what I'm talking about. See no evil, eh? Disappointed in you, Jeff. How'd you know my name? I've seen it spelled in the leaves, said Morgan obscurely. Where they blow, they formed it. Jeffrey. You what? Know what that means? You shake your head, sirrah. You've neglected your ancient history, Geoffrey. With ardent enjoyment, Hanley looked on. But ancient history hasn't neglected you. Nursed you through the cycles on its bloody apron. Hanley seemed to be pinching himself in his good suit and golden glasses. De Lacy's a Frenchman, isn't he? Your top boy's a Norman, Geoffrey. He ain't a Norman, he's local. Born and bred down this way. You're lucky he ain't here now. Don't like being talked about, Mick, and he don't like being looked at, and he don't like being looked for. Geoffrey was building up a fair head of steam. So you concede he is your top boy, Lawyer Hanley put it to him, which is to say a particular favourite of yours. I ain't got no favourites, Geoffrey said in an ordinary way that had Donna Dewan giggling. Yet he is your top boy. Geoffrey sniffed, and I thought I saw a trace of something like a father's pride, and cursed me if I didn't feel for him a little in this baiting. Shit soft. I take it your silence indicates agreement. You got him there, Mr. Hanley, said Morgan. His top boy is a naughty Norman. I take him as he comes, the landlord said, trying to lose interest. Past the past. Let bygones be bygones. A man can change. You lack a sense of history, Geoffrey, Morgan told him. The past is here, always. That's one thing. 11th century, the Normans came. They left him here as a sleeper. Consider his surname, Geoffrey. That's not an honest English name to my reckoning. The second is this. Your top boy hasn't changed, hasn't grown. All he's done is lose his hair. A dog doesn't change, hasn't repented either. He hasn't acknowledged his crimes, young Mickey. Crimes? He deserves a fucking medal, that lad, cried Geoffrey. Tell him to come here then. Tell me you want to shake his hand. Tell him to come here now. We want to buy him a pint. Won't want people thinking he's scared, Mickey the Norman. Won't want people tweeting that he's yitten. Along the bar, Morgan, Turbo, Hanley, Donna Dewan leaned like cowboys. He ain't no fucking Frenchman. And he don't drink with boobs or coons or wops. And let me tell you, he wouldn't touch the one-eyed taff with a diner rod, crackled Geoffrey. Spittle flecked the corners of his mouth. A vein stirred in his fly ring like a snake beneath a sheet. So the only one Mick de Lacy drink with was me. Some distinction. What do you know about my eye, Geoffrey? Morgan was saying. Here he comes close to the nub, isn't it? He should have done them both, snarled Geoff the unkind. Who's he? Whoever done it. Down the bar, punters had been waiting for drinks. At first they made signs and called Geoffrey. They were silent now. Come on, Jeffers. You know very well who he is. Where can we find him? You've suddenly gone quiet, biting your tongue. Shouldn't have said that, should you? After all, could have been an industrial accident that did for my eye. Melanoma, car crash, overhanging branch. But you knew it was a local face. You knew this very well. And what you said before trying to cover up with a generality suggested to me that it's still remembered as a great sporting moment not far from here. But silence, Sirrah. When I talk till I finished. And I take a long time about it. Too long as I fancy, and there's no power on earth I've known that can prevent me either. I can talk men to death, and I've used the skill on 2 occasions, which is to say sparingly, seeing as occasions grow to serve fate. But this great sporting moment is only referred to by a chosen few, and on pain of nasty treatment, you aren't meant to blab about it in the presence of strangers. Which you just did. You've blown it, my man. And when his uncle hears, you better head for your retirement chalet in Thorpesby under shit, lock the door and string yourself up. Make it easy on yourself, old timer. It'll be less painful. Who are you? Where's the landlord? I don't want no grief. You've been visited by the cunt-tator. I put the slow sign on you, Butty. The old man'll know where to find you. Oi, Jeff. On came an English lion in overalls. You got problems, mate? Chest out, he trash-talked Turbo, whose left hip swayed before the dull crack. Jesus Christ. He reacted with reasonable force to a threat he couldn't safely ignore or walk away from, owing to severe provocation within a confined and notoriously hostile space and other circumstances such as the landlord's use of hate speech, Section 4 Public Order Act, declared Handley, as lion blew red bubbles. A mate crouched at his side. Morgan hummed. At least friend on the floor's got more bottle than your top boy. Where the hell is he? Already ran away from us once this evening. When the white-bellied rat does turn up, tell him he forgot his catch. What catch? This fucking catch. Morgan made a sign to Donna Jewin, who unhitched his golden satchel, opened it and spilled the tench, one by one on the bar where they lay in armoured row. Someone gagged. Thank you. Back to Vic.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, so final name of the night, still in the hat, just in case there's any questions on that. But I think you know who it is. Tony Kent. So, our final reader, Tony Kent, is the author of the Michael Devlin, Joe Dempsey thriller series, which began with the Zoe Ball Book Club pick, Killer Intent, in 2018. Ooh! Continued with Richard and Judy's book club pick, Marked for Death, in 2019, and continues again in 2020 with the newly released international political thriller Power Play. In his day job, Tony is a leading criminal barrister specialising in the defence of allegations of serious crime. And before that, he was a heavyweight boxer who represented England internationally and who held a host of amateur championship titles. I don't think I'm going to get a more intriguing bio than that this week. Tony now lives in Buckinghamshire with his wife and dog just outside stalking distance of Frederick Forsyth. So everybody, please put your hands together for Tony Kent.
Can you hear me? Okay. Now, I am probably leaning at the moment because I didn't realise we'd be here for quite so long, so I've got through quite a lot of vodka. There may be a fair bit of leaning going on. I'm also going to, because I can't see properly as a result of the vodka, I'm going to have to put on my glasses. which I've kept off because they're too small, because I broke both my other sets of glasses and I have an unusually large head, and I've had to buy off-the-rack glasses which don't fit me, so been avoiding that. Right, the reading is from Power Play, which is my latest book, which came out two and a half weeks ago, 16th of April, and it's the beginning of the book that I'll read. Before I do that, I should say, I think we're giving these books away, aren't we? And this one I've already signed and put Noir at the Bar number 6, so you know that the one you get is the one that I read from. So it's chapter 1. 3 minutes. David Webb and Jim Nelson turned their heads at the sound of 4 knocks. Webb instinctively glanced towards the cockpit door. Nelson did not, his eyes instead fitting to the small monitor to his left. The screen showed 2 stewardesses. One was facing the door, whilst the other faced out onto the first class section of the Pan Atlantic Airlines flight PA-16. Standard security protocol for the few seconds that the plane's control centre would be vulnerable. "It's Jade," Nelson said. He unclipped his safety harness as he spoke. Climbing to his feet, he took the few steps to the rear of the cockpit and released the one-way lock. Jade Cox's smile greeted Nelson as he opened the door. It came as no surprise. She was always happy, or at least it seemed that way to him. He had to concede, though, that he was perhaps not the best witness. In Nelson's eyes, Jade could do no wrong. He stepped aside, giving the young flight attendant enough room to enter. It was no easy task in the already cramped space, and was made more difficult by the fact that she was carrying a large tray. But Jade had a practiced routine, and she manoeuvred her way around Nelson as he closed the cockpit door and returned to his seat. "I hope you're hungry, Jim," she said with a smile. 2 minutes. Nelson glanced down at the foil-covered dishes on the tray that Jade had placed on his temporary table. "Looks great," he said, looking back up at Jade, "whatever it is." "You got one of those for me?" David Webb's voice was gruffer than Nelson's, the sound of an older man. "Of course, Captain Webb." Jane's tone was less familiar with the senior officer, but just as pleasant, as she placed a second tray in front of him. "Here you go." "What's that?" Webb was examining the dessert doubtfully. "It's treacle pudding, Captain." "Treacle pudding? Is that another English thing?" "Yes, sir." And here was me thinking that we were on an American airline. "We flew out of London, David," Nelson interrupted. He knew that Webb's abrupt manner could make the younger crew uncomfortable, whether the captain intended it or not. "We've got to cater for the Brits we've got aboard. I doubt our guest back there would agree with you." Webb motioned towards the cockpit door as he spoke. It was unnecessary. Nelson knew exactly who his captain was referring to. Dale Victor, a candidate for the Republican nomination for the next president of the United States of America, and already the runaway favourite to win that race. Nelson chose to ignore Webb's political bait, and he turned his attention back to Jade. "Have you spoken to him yet?" he asked. "I have, yeah," Jade replied. "And what did you think?" 1 minute. "I thought he was bloody gorgeous." Nelson laughed. It was not quite the answer he'd been expecting. "Gorgeous? Jade, the guy's nearly 60. "Yeah, but still, it's the charisma, isn't it? It's like you're the only person up here with him when he looks at you. It's a bit hypnotic." Nelson laughed again. He had flown with celebrities occupying the first class cabin many times, often with Jade on the crew, but he had never seen her react so enthusiastically. "Have I got some competition back there?" he asked, only half joking. "Of course not," Jade replied. She waited a beat before adding, "I mean, he's got his wife with him, isn't he?" This time it was Webb who laughed, loud and hard. "He's got you there, buddy," he bellowed. 1 second. It is impossible to be sure what is faster, the speed of human thought, warning that something is very wrong, or the speed with which an explosion can spread throughout a fully fueled commercial jumbo jet. And so it was impossible to know if any of them, David Webb, Jim Nelson, Jade Cox, or anyone else on flight PA16 was aware of the moments that their lives were ripped away. The explosion began in the luggage hold, a single case filled to capacity with military-grade C4 and a crude homemade timer. The C4 itself would have been enough to tear the plane in two, enough to guarantee no survivors, but someone was taking no risks. The case had been carefully placed at the closest possible point to the base of the wing, ensuring that the explosion ignited the fuel store within it. The combination of the explosives and the fuel was devastating. The smooth, uneventful journey of the Boeing 747 was brought to an abrupt end with white-hot jet fuel flames engulfing every inch of the massive flying machine. No time for a brace warning. No time for oxygen masks, no time for crash positions. Just the sudden, fatal introduction of hellfire. Flight PA16 from London's Heathrow to New York's JFK ended its journey in a violent storm of blazing debris, raining its charred remains across a 5-mile stretch of the Atlantic Ocean. Bit short, but
very effective. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so thank you very much to all of our readers this evening for giving up your time and your work. Thank you to all of you who've joined us, as always. We do really appreciate it, and we hope we're keeping you entertained during these interesting times. I think the quote of the evening has been completely steamrolled by Craig Robertson. It's deep fried, I was going to say quinoa and avocado. I haven't even had a drink. Quick word, Nikki Black is finishing as our chat bouncer tonight. She's just going to be joining us in the audience from next week. We do have somebody keeping an eye on you from next week, but somebody different. Things to keep you busy until our next virtual Noir at the Bar, which you are definitely not going to want to miss. There's the Blood Brothers podcast, the Red Hot Chili Writers podcast, the Tartan Noir podcast. They're great for your little hourly constitutionals while you're out on near a loud walk. Edinburgh Noir at the Bar is live tomorrow, I believe from 7 o'clock, but do check out their Facebook page. William Shaw is still interviewing people involved in publishing and writing every day on his Facebook at 4 o'clock. And Newcastle Noir, after last week's success, is returning at the end of May for some more virtual panels. So do keep an eye on their Facebook and YouTube channels. Thank you very much again to our readers, to our audience, to Nikki and to Simon. And I hope to see you again next week. Thank you very much, everybody.